Really excited to have Chris Scanlon with us today. He is CRO at Human. Great title topic is sales leadership at small versus large companies. So something that I think a lot of people have had different experiences with and maybe struggle with. So definitely be a great topic to talk about. We're sponsored by Alexander Group, who's the go-to-market and sales compensation sponsor, who by chance you actually have some experience with, right?
I certainly do. On two occasions, I leveraged them during my time at Cylance, and once again during my time at ExtraHop, and they were fantastic. They do great work, tremendous help with the modeling, take your existing data and expand on it, and really help you make good decisions for your annual operating planning process.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I like to describe them, kind of you have the McKinsey and Bain that are the white collar, say expensive, take a long time. Probably more kind of blue collar, get the fingernails dirty. Everybody's been there forever, and they're all just great experts on all the different topics.
They are, and they see so many different purviews and so many different companies. There's a very like modeling that applies to the organizations, and so when you're looking at customer segmentation of your sales force, trying to help identify your ICP. But I think equally, if not as important, just modeling compensation plans. It's something that I don't always look forward to. And it's not just salespeople, right? You got to think about your SEs, you got to think about your channel leaders, the various levels there within, customer success, whatever might be in your remit. There's a lot of detail.
Awesome. Very cool. And also, as always, brought to you by Sales Community. Tucker, maybe if you can throw the link up. So for those that are members, thanks. For those that are not, you can join there. And we have Tucker behind the scenes helping as well. So Tucker, thanks for your help. And check out Sales Community if you want to learn more and sell more. And also have an impressive group of advisory board members like Chris. So by way of introduction, Chris lives in LA at Redondo Beach. Nice place to live.
Yeah, the mean streets of Redondo, as someone I worked for once said.
There you go. And two teenage boys, 16 and 17, aspiring lax and also skiers. So very cool there. And you also spent some time in Park City. So that's definitely an awesome spot for sure. And we're trying to figure out how we met, but we think it was through Frank Rausch probably 5 years ago or so. Right?
I believe that is the case. Frank seems to be the mayor of a lot of places, and is very good at putting people together. So I enjoyed my time working with Frank, and that was a great introduction.
Awesome. Great guy. I was texting with him yesterday, actually. And also to help me with my intro, since I don't have much specific in terms of us working together, I've got a few of your friends. So one is Rich Hughes, says, Chris is the best, a servant leader that really listens and communicates well with his sales force, partners, and customers alike. Chris is one of a kind problem solver and is the best leader I've ever worked for. He leads by example and is always available for anyone at any time. A true leader that takes a logical and team approach to formulating concepts into mutual success. From Todd Cronert. Chris is a great leader because he's authentic and relatable. Chris's teams perform at a high level because he's clear with expectations and drives a winning culture. And from Frank Rausch, who just were talking about, Chris, aka Scanny, a true sales warrior. He wore it on his sleeve and was never afraid to fight the good fight for his team or his customers. He'll always have my respect, and tell him it is on me to reconnect soon. Have a great podcast. I would be listening, but I'm in Tokyo for the week. So he loves traveling, or loves to complain about traveling.
If he's not traveling, he's at his bar there in Philly.
or at the Jersey Shore.
Or at the Jersey Shore. That's right. Yeah. Well, you reached deep to get some folks right there. That's very humbling to hear some of those comments. I feel like I'm on a game show or some sort of a social media program, and you've dug into my background.
There you go. And for those watching or listening along, feel free to chime in with any comments or questions as well, and Tucker will pull them up for us. So jumping into the questions, so you were undergrad at Cal State Chico, And your first job was actually at a Sears training program?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I most of the schools I had applied to were the good old Catholic Jesuit schools, and went to visit my older sister who was at school there. And I thought, wow, what a fun environment. I love this place. It was gorgeous. It was like a East Coast campus, but on the West Coast without some of the weather. Very close to Lake Tahoe. So I became a huge skiing aficionado and studied business there. I actually went abroad and lived in Central America. So I speak fluent Spanish. So it's interesting seeing a 6'1", blonde-haired, blue-eyed Irishman rolling through Central America speaking Spanish. And I also played soccer down there as well. So enjoyed that. And then that kind of started things and graduated. And my mother was president of Sears. So if you can believe that, she was the highest ranking woman in a Fortune 5 company at one point in time. And so I had a very strong female business oriented role model. People asked what my dad did. I said he was a bum. He just moved whenever we moved, and built a shopping center or something, and just was kind of a developer and had his little projects. But mom was the big career, and learned a lot from her. And when I came out of university, I wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do, short of going back to Costa Rica and being a surf bum and playing soccer, which wasn't necessarily on the table, unfortunately. So I took the executive battery. And Randy, if you remember back in the day, right, you had IBM, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble.
Xerox.
Yep. How can you forget Xerox? Just great 18-month rotational management training programs, and still some of the best foundation work that laid the foundation just for my business career. So really enjoyed that. But quickly realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do. What was neat about that is you learned a lot about business. And in part of one of my rotations, and this is the technology hook, I worked for a group that did the IBM Advantis point of sale cash register systems at stores. And so I kind of got really hooked on that. And then my last tour, if you will, with Sears was in the Denver market. So I ended up staying and going back to school at University of Colorado at Boulder and studied computer networking.
Oh, awesome. And then maybe briefly, you worked for a lot of great companies, but maybe just go through your career briefly from there. Yeah.
So worked at, while I was going to school at University of Colorado, you'll find this funny. We are now doing a live simulcast, actually, you'd probably call it. My day job to pay the bills was I was a video conference engineer doing point-to-point video. So those that remember the old MCUs and picture tells and Zydecoms and video conferencing. So I did all the Merrill Lynch analyst calls around the world. And so I would bring people and I was a conference producing engineer. What was great is I had this shirt and a tie that was always rigged to just be tied really fast. But if you saw me from the waist down, I was probably in a ski bib because I would go skiing in between class and starting, the night shift as a video conference engineer. So
there you go.
Had some fun doing that. But from there, I then dove into kind of the internetworking world and went to take a job at, if you remember, Bay Networks.
Sure.
And while I was interviewing there, someone said, well, hey, we have this reseller. And this was my first introduction to the reselling market. And they said, you should probably go there because we have a funded head. So I ended up working at this place called Network Catalyst, which since has been bought, 15 times over. And I think it's part of Presidio now, if I recall. But anyway, cut my teeth and learned a lot about the business. And it really started with the internetworking. I was working and representing broadband Shasta carrier grade switches for which became Nortel eventually, and really cut my teeth into that reseller world, collaborative, consultative selling. This is circa 1997, and really came out into the business then and never looked back.
Awesome. So great.
Yeah.
So now at Human, maybe tell us about what Human does.
Yeah. So just real quick, as part of that train there. So I then went into the security side of the house, which back in security, it was just having antivirus, this firewall thing, and then maybe you had some URL filtering. Security started to build up. And from there, I went to work at Cashflow, which became Blue Coat Systems. So I was there during a brand transformation. So I have experienced brand transformations, and we acquired the caching division of NetCash. So built that business up. And then from there, I embarked on a journey, which leading up to the human question here, at a company called Accuvant. And those in the world may remember Accuvant. It was one of the original pure play security reseller VARs, if you will. And I think the other was Gary Fish's company at Fishnet. And so I began when it was a $5 million business. And then we built it up to about an $800 million business. And so you had Fishnet and Accuvant. And then, of course, the good old private equity world got involved. And our good friends at Blackstone came in and acquired us, and then turned around and acquired Fishnet. And in 2015, I was tasked with merging the Hatfields and McCoys. So, and making sure everyone got along nicely and had good synergies. And so that integration became a multi-billion-dollar business, and we rebranded the business, what is now known as today as Optiv Security. And so I spent 13 years there. We ended up selling, Blackstone ended up selling to KKR. And so I exited the business at the culmination of the KKR sale. And then from there, went to work at Silence and was part of a team that led the due diligence to sell to BlackBerry. And then from there, I became president of the Americas, and where I met Frank Rausch at Checkpoint. And then had an opportunity to work in some private equity areas where I did some contracting work. And then took a job at ExtraHop, and now I'm at Human. And so that was the evolution of the career to this point.
Nice. Great. Real impressive. So tell us about Human.
Human's interesting. First off, it's an interesting name. It's the amalgamation of three companies that came together. And for me, it's new and exciting because there's a stint of the business that's really ad tech media world, which is very different from the cyber world. So stemming back to just some of the relationships I've had in the private equity world, we are a company that's owned by Goldman Sachs and Westcap. And then we also have other major investors, Mr. DeWalt at Night Dragon, and then our friends Jay Leak, Dan Burns and company over at Sin Ventures and Vertex. So knew some of the sponsors, and they had inserted Stu Solomon, who recently left Recorded Future as their president, and he was recruited to come be the CEO of Human. And we love good movies, Randy, and you're a Boston guy, so you'll love this. There's a movie called The Town, and you've got, you may know it well,
Charleston,
being a Boston guy. And there's a scene where Ben Affleck comes in and he looks at Jeremy Renner and he says, "Hey, we're going to go hurt some people, and we're going to hurt them really bad, but you don't get to ask me any questions." And he says, "Whose car are we taking?" I felt like when Stu called me and said, "Do you want to come work here?" all I said was, "Whose car are we taking?" And so it's a business that focuses on ad tech media, kind of bot detection. And then there's also an enterprise side that does bot detection, account takeovers, and defends against account takeovers and fraud and things like that.
Awesome. And I just want to speak to some of the shout outs here. So Joey says, "Randy the Man Seidel." Thanks, Joey. Then he says, "Looking forward to the conversation. Chris, good work over there at Human." And then Janali, if I'm saying that right, give us a thumbs up. So thanks for that. And any others, feel free to chime in with comments or especially questions. So in your role as CRO, besides sales, what other areas are you responsible for?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for the entire go-to-market motion. It originally was thought to have marketing, but I didn't need to bite off that. So it encompasses customer success, pre-sales engineering, our partnerships, vendor relations, channels, old field sales, as well as some entities on our media and ad tech side as well. Awesome. So anything that touches anything that has to do with making the cash register ring is part of the organization.
That's great. And then what do you say in terms of the size, in terms of numbers of customers or revenue, or what can you share?
Yeah, we're that we've reached that pinnacle where you're north of 100 million in ARR. I'll leave it a little slightly vague there, but we've eclipsed that mountain, and so it's rough and tough about 400 and approaching 430 employees, growing very nicely, opening up some new lines of business, and so we have the support of our great sponsors. And they're fully behind us and recommitted to the business. And so we're looking to make additional investments in the business. And for me, it's interesting because this ad tech media side's new, but it's something that I identify with. It's very mission driven. And for my entire career, I think I spent in the bowels of an IDF or an MDF or a data center somewhere. But this is technology that, I was explaining it to my 17-year-old son, and he says, "So Dad, you stop bots that are buying up all of the Olivia Rodrigo tickets and causing the price increases." And I said, "That's exactly what we do." He says, "I get it." So, or the person that's on Priceline and realizes their account got taken over, or someone that's, on a sports betting site and something happened to them. And this is all the stuff we do behind the scenes to prevent those types of things from happening in an e-commerce world.
Wow, very cool. And then you're hiring. What type of positions?
We are hiring. Yes, thank you for that pedestal here and pulpit. We're hiring for all positions, particularly in software engineering, pre-sales engineering, field sales, customer success, marketing. We are open for business.
Awesome. Cool. What's so far looking to come, work there? What's special about the culture?
That's such a great question. And, you've hosted this for a long time and been an accomplished sales leader yourself. And people always have their own quips or accolades or little fun sayings about culture. I've read lots of articles about it. I'm big on that, by the way. I thoroughly believe in that. Folks would often ask, to what would you attribute some of your success in the past? And it's clearly the people, the ability to recruit and retain great people and continue to drive them and let them build and innovate and develop. And a lot of that has to do with a nurturing culture. And it's just a place where people want to be. I often think back to one of the greatest things people ask, what have you done in your career? And I think about that merger and acquisition between Accuvant and Fishnet and the ability to retain the top 50 sellers for 2 straight years after. That's not easy to do. And so you have to create a culture in which people want to work and thrive and build their business. So for me, about this place it's just filled with great people. At this stage in my career, I think we have that saying, a no a-hole policy, and you just want to work with some really fantastic folks.
Yep.
That are all committed. And this is one of those places and one of those environments.
Awesome. Really good. From Ted, we have cyber is a great place to be for sure. Did you experience any early indicators that drew you to the cyberspace?
Yes. I had started my career, as I mentioned, in internetworking. So it was a lot of, switches and crossover cables and routers and all that kind of fun stuff. But then I started to realize that it was more than just antivirus and a firewall. And I started to hear more needs from our customers. And if you remember 20 years ago, Randy, you had a gentleman or a young lady might have been in charge of everything. It was your desktops, it was your laptops, it was the servers, it was the phone system.
Right.
And oh, by the way, you're in charge of this other stuff like antivirus and this and that. You leap forward today and you think about major financial institutions that have roughly 4,000 to 5,000 people that just wake up every day thinking about cybersecurity. And so I just kind of saw this emergence. And I give a lot of credit to Dan Burns, former CEO of Optiv Accuvant, who's now over at Sin Ventures. who had the vision and the foresight, along with three of his partners, to start a company. And I equally give that same credit to Gary Fish, because I think those were the two preeminent leaders that focused just specifically on building out cybersecurity services and representing those products. And look where we're at today.
Awesome. Very, very cool, for sure. So our title topic is sales leadership at small versus large companies.
Yeah.
So what are some of the differences that you've experienced?
Well, it's interesting. I jokingly say this, and I'll put myself out there because I'm still employed by some sponsors. But when it's all said and done, I want to write a book someday, and it's going to be entitled "Large Private Equity: How Can Smart People Sometimes Not See the Signs?" Because you have such different dichotomies between small businesses and large businesses. And I've worked at large, obviously, Optiv, multi-billion-dollar company, private organization that had private equity come in. I think by the most part, they did a lot of right things. Those sponsors did, for sure. But once the business starts getting bigger, the challenge as a sales leader, you become more and more removed from the front line. And that, you might say, okay, thanks, Captain Obvious. But there's nuances along the way that just change. So you go from knowing everything about your customers, maybe even being involved in deals, sometimes accused of being probably too involved in deals, because we like getting into deals, and with a technical background, you just want to get into it. And then you fast forward, and it got to a point where I was just happy if somebody would take me out on a sales call. I used to just mandate someone take me somewhere. If I was having a bad week or something, I made sure I followed up by putting at least 2 customer calls on the calendar the next week, because that going out on customer calls and listening to the customers or partners or vendors in that case just always reinvigorated me. And so the challenge in those bigger organizations is you sometimes just get you just get resigned to, as I say, checking people's homework, right? You're looking over the TPS reports or their activity levels and forecasts and Salesforce and all these other tools that we check every day. And it just becomes onerous sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember when I went to HP initially, there's a lot of things we had to work on, but then ultimately I found out, okay, if we can raise the bar in doing more sales calls, so I'll say maybe on average people are doing like 3 or 4. This is even at the rep and the C level. So I said, okay, if I and my leadership team can do 8 to 10 a week, which is hard to do, right? Yeah. So we got to kind of clear the calendar with the BS calls that are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's going to be all hands on deck. All the corporate BS, we're not going to do that. Just go sales calls. So if we can lead by example, then kind of high tides float all boats. Then you can ultimately get that leverage with the reps and SEs doing it, which is tough, and that's especially pre-COVID when you're doing the face to face. But that leading by example, I think whether you're a small or big company is really vital.
Well, you're obviously a big sports fan. Anyone that knows you, and if they didn't know you, they would just look at your background on the wall there for sure. I drew a lot of just success and analogies, I guess, from playing organized sports and coming along in that fashion. And I just think about being a player's coach. And you remember growing up, and you think about some of those great coaches that are out there that you just think you want to emulate, and that there's folks that I've worked for that I would say I would lay down in traffic for still to this day, because they were so impactful in my career, and that you just want to win with. And that kind of comes back to your culture question earlier. And so when you can create an environment like that, it makes things a lot easier to win. And as you get into those bigger organizations, I think there's, I'll talk about maybe a lesson that was learned and just in my own development along the way. During those change of controls, and I think of my time at Optiv, we acquired 8 companies, but we also went through 3 change of controls. And 2 of those change of controls were with 2 of the largest private equity firms in the world, being Blackstone and KKR. And each time I had to re-interview for my job. There was no forsaken that you were just going to be that person. And so what I realized along the way was I had to evolve as a leader. So when you're that frontline sales manager, it's great because you feel as if you know the most about the product. You can get in there and help your sellers win a deal. That's your value at that time. But as you move up that food chain, I had to learn how to become a better operator of the business, not just the best sales leader, but an operator of the business. Because as things got bigger, you had to show that you had institutional control of your business. You knew where it was coming from. So getting back to the next evolution of my education, I ended up going back to school and studying business at UCLA, and really surrounded myself with folks from our sponsors. I had a great mentor at Blackstone, and he really showed me how to be a better operator in the business. And so, as he would say it, he was the token salt and peppered gray hair individual that spent, a career at IBM as well as Cisco. And so when you think about just operational command of large business, I had to evolve as the business continued to grow into a multi-billion-dollar organization.
Yeah, for sure. And from Ian, we have executive alignment is the key to the castle. Hope all is well, Chris. So thanks for that, Ian. So what about the differences with kind of hiring and profile between large and small?
Yeah, I think when you're, when it depends. Some folks would argue, hey, when you get into that bigger company, sometimes there's so many layers, people just kind of are on cruise control and they can hide out. When you're in smaller companies, it's much harder to do that. There's folks that I think back to some of the early days at Cylance that were just incredible competitors, trying to forge a new business. And obviously CrowdStrike was one of those as well. That was up and coming around the same time. And so you had these new next generation AV companies just needed absolute killers out in the market that just knew how to find new deals, open up new accounts, close them, and move on, right? Their forte wasn't account management. Their forte was opening new accounts, and I'm going to let customer success and account management and renewals take it from here. I'm moving on. And so you needed folks like that. And there's sellers to this day that I still say that I fondly will say, you would never be successful at working for me when I was at Checkpoint, because you're not of that DNA. It's a much larger company. It's just a different way in which you had to behave when you were back at Cylance. And so you need a very entrepreneurial, aggressive, take no for an answer, don't take no for an answer type of mentality. Also kind of a rule breaker. I think when you're in that mode, I have some of that here at Human, we're just over that $100 million mark. So you still kind of operate as a startup. We're not a big company yet, but we're legitimate. And so you have that leniency. I have some folks that are some of those renegade rule breakers that will ask for forgiveness. That doesn't really work sometimes at the bigger companies that that you've been through, but you let them get away with it at this level. And then as the business gets to that point, it doesn't really work anymore. And I remember having a great conversation with one of my mentors, a guy named John Giacomini, who I'd worked for at 3 different companies. And he would talk to me about this, that sometimes you got to let your lead horses break some glass, because that's what they do. But as the organization becomes 500 million and plus, they either have to adapt and change with the way the organization is run, or they simply punch out and they move on to that next startup. And there certainly are startup sellers, and there are certainly folks that are more of that account management, big company.
Yeah, for sure. What was I just going to ask? Oh, yes. The way I like to say it is, kind of think like an owner, right? So, if you're, earlier stage company, that's kind of, you have the DNA. Big company, DNA is people, used to being told. I'm like, okay, well, don't wait for somebody to tell you. If you own the company, kind of what would you do, right? And that could be maybe an extreme exaggeration, but, think about breaking the rules. Okay, what's kind of the right thing to do, and try and let that mindset prevail, which a lot of times in the big company culture, could be considered a no-no. But that's something I always would try and do.
I agree with you on that. And I think about a time when I was at Optiv and even Checkpoint in big companies, I would try to tell some sellers, listen, I'm not going to be around to always ask what to do. I can't do that, and I don't want you to do that. You're going to have to go out and make some decisions, and some of them will be good, some of them will be bad, but go make a decision. And I always would lead them with this. If you feel that it's in the best interest of the customer, then go with that feeling. And we'll talk about whether or not it was the right call afterwards, but go with that.
Yeah, totally good. And then what about differences on the kind of training or enablement side at the kind of small versus big company?
Yeah, I am a big enablement person. And I don't know if it's a generational thing or not, but I've always believed in that. I know I've worked for some folks that felt it's very, rainbows and unicorns and touchy-feely type stuff. You're a salesperson. You're just supposed to know how to sell. And I'm like, well, how? Well, we have this new product and they're in sales. They're just supposed to go sell it. And I'm like, well, who's taught them how to do that? And so I've been a big fan of enablement. I've spent millions and millions of dollars over the years on enablement programs. And, there's different frameworks, right? Whether it's value selling or MedPick or whatever it might be. I've instituted many of those. I think there's a few things that I always come back to, though, is regardless of what system you use or framework you use, you really have to still have people on the inside that are curators of that. And today, Randy, and you know this, there's so many organizations that provide really great training. The problem is that most folks go into an SKO and they think it's 3 days and they take that syllabus or that 3-ring binder and then they shove it in their file folder and they forget about it. They don't realize there's a continuing education component that falls behind it. And if you think about some of those programs today, there are major universities that you're probably well aware of, having kids that have been through college here recently, that have programs about sales. I mean, the University of Washington has a professional selling curriculum for undergrads. And when you think about the material, it's like a $50,000 advanced degree education that we oftentimes are providing our sellers. And so what I usually do, I'll tell people, this isn't something I'm doing to you. This is something I'm doing for you.
Right. Totally. All right. We got from Ted, the CXO team, CEO, CRO, CMO, CPO have several new executives. What challenges and opportunities does that present when collaborating with your peers? Great question.
Yeah. Wonderful question. I'd say the benefit of new teams is that you get to build them, and your CEO and sponsors usually have, we talk about ICP a lot in our business, right? In the sales and marketing and go-to-market. Well, I also talk about ICP as the ideal candidate profile as well, not just customer profile. And so our CEO really has done some diligence. Mostly his take is this: hey, if you're interviewing with me, you've already proven that you know your stuff. When I interview you, I'm here to figure out, are you going to be a good fit to the rest of the team? And that's what he spends a lot of time and emphasis. And that would be Stu Solomon. And Stu's just a brilliant technologist, business person, and visionary in our industry. And he is very big on just an ethos. And so we spent a lot of time looking at those connection points in the hiring process. It becomes more difficult maybe when there's an already established team and you might be the new person and there's not a lot of other change that's happening. And that becomes part of the art and not the science. And then when I talk about the evolution of being a sales leader to a sales executive to a sales professional, from sales professional to a sales executive, those are those things, figuring out how to make nice maybe with the head of engineering or the chief product officer, and find a politically correct way of telling them you're making products that you want the buying force to go buy instead of making products that my people are asking for.
Right.
Those are always delicate discussions, or maybe the relationship between sales and marketing. It can be challenging. Fortunately, where I'm at, I don't have any of those challenges, knock on wood. And my marketing partner, May Mitchell, who's well known in our industry, and I work very collaboratively together. In fact, she joins all my forecast calls. She's on my team meeting calls. We literally run the business as true partners.
Awesome. Any tricks or best practices you do, speaking of marketing, kind of for top of funnel leads?
Randy, where are the Glengarry leads? Everybody wants to know. Listen, pipeline sufficiency is probably the biggest challenge faced by anybody I speak to, regardless of what vertical you're in. It's no different on the ad tech media side than on our cyber side. And so building pipeline sufficiency is really one of the top two things I think about every day, along with May. And we tackle that in a number of ways. Different marketing capabilities. We augment our SDR, BDR organizations with outsourced organizations. So a little plug for our friends at the Pipeline Group. I've used them before, and they've been great to work with in augmenting some of our development, but also filling the top of funnel. But there's an equally big of a challenge. And when you think about that funnel, right, it kind of narrows down. And so it gets squeezed or clogged. And so what are you also doing as part of that enablement with your sellers in creating what is your client journey? So what is your stages in which you move your deal stages forward, and clearly define those and incorporate them into your sales force and your nomenclature in that CEP process, that client engagement process journey from origination to closed one and all points in between.
Gotcha. So given on the lead gen side, given that kind of email now a lot of times gets blocked or put to junk or whatever, so kind of that cold calling function that you have, it sounds like partially outsourced. Then you also have kind of SDR, BDR group that's doing the cold calling. We do. And then also we have a pretty good inbound as well. So it's interesting. There's been recent discussions. We're in the midst of, here at Human, we've hired a new PR firm in Highwire, and they're working with us to redesign a few things. Listen, I think websites are sometimes very underutilized. They're sometimes used as the virtual bulletin board. We just take content and shove it up there and we stick it up there. Right. We sometimes forget, wait a minute, this is a revenue generating tool, probably your largest revenue generation tool that sometimes gets overlooked just to become what I would call mama's fridge, right? When you were young and you got an A on your test and you'd put the magnet up on your mom's fridge. And so mom's fridge becomes the front face of your website sometimes. And we and many other organizations are working to make it much more interactive and become a true lead source generator for us, particularly with what we do for front-facing e-commerce sites. It's the biggest place to go, because when you want to learn about a company, what's the first thing you do? You go on your browser and you pull up the company. Yeah, awesome. And then any favorite kind of, I call it the sales tech stack tools that you're working with?
You know what? There's so many great ones. You and I have talked about Gong before, and we're a user of that. We could. I don't want to take up the rest of the show talking about tech stack, but I will say I'm a big fan of Clary. I recently did an interview with them, and a friend of mine over there, Kevin, who's their president, and I've used that product, and it's been extremely helpful, both in big and small organizations, just to correlate and organize forecasting. How do you get, it's funny, even though we still have these great tools, you still see people export and go back to what they always know, which is Excel spreadsheets. Right. But I try to run my entire business just through that, or even some business intelligence tools, whether it be like a Domo or a Looker. And so you just need something that provides that heads up display. And I remember I ran a multi-billion-dollar organization off of 10 Domo cards. And if you want to start getting deep, then you can start double clicking and getting into the deal details. But at a high level, I spend time creating my heads up display with my key performance indicators and graphs that just give me a sense of the business, both on the sales side as well as partner components as well. So Salesforce obviously is tremendous, but yep. Clary gives me a lot of great insight, as well as Looker, just to manage my day-to-day business.
Awesome. And you're also leveraging 6th Sense?
Yes, thanks. Yes, thanks for that reminder. It's funny, we've had it. When I got here, it was almost an embarrassment of riches. There was no tool we didn't have. Well, we try to assess, is it really implemented to its fullest capabilities? It's as if probably 3 years ago, there was this influx of money, right? Rates were low, money was cheap, and everyone was just like, oh, you got to buy this tool, you got to buy that tool, you got to buy that tool. And so there's all these tools, but they're somewhat disparate and not necessarily correlated in terms of the data sharing. And so we spent a lot of time here working on just data science for our own use. not just only for our core product, but just for our internal use to be an aggregator of all the different data feeds that come in. So you have one source of truth. So our business intelligence team focuses a lot on just creating one central repository source of truth for data. Because this, at the end of a quarter, you've got your head of FP&A, your controller, you've got your CFO, then there's the head of sales, and everyone looks at their reports and, why do you have $1 million more than I do? Well, why are you off by 500K over here? And there's always that true up of some sort. We spent a lot of time here at Human to ensure that we're working from one data set.
Awesome. Cool. And then on the contact side, I think you're leveraging Zoom Info.
Yeah. Zoom Info, 6 cents on some of the marketing side. Absolutely. Very, very necessary tools that we've had. And part of what we've done is just, said, hey, there's some new folks over here. We've got retrenched with our account liaisons to say, okay, let's look at what we own. Can we do an inventory? What are things that we should be using that we're not using? And we're literally in the midst of going through that process right now, particularly with 6 cents.
Wow, that's great. And it's interesting how the whole tech stack, a lot of the companies, without getting into specifics, are all trying to step into each other's areas, right?
They really are. With some of these acquisitions, the lines are getting a little bit more blurred. I know Clary's made a few acquisitions, and some of those tech stacks are seeing some consolidation.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes for sure. But, forecasting is, you think about, back in the old days in terms of how we used to do it now, being able to have that, automation and the visibility and flags up to you is just massive.
It's so helpful, but also, Randy, let's not lose sight of the fact, and this is where we come in as sales professionals and sales executives and leaders. We still have to be prescriptive, because no tool matters unless I can get the data that's in here out of this brain,
right,
system, because then it doesn't matter. I don't know. And so when we were talking about top of funnel and just moving through the client engagement process, my biggest challenge, and I think a lot of sales leadership can relate to this, is when you see a deal that might go from what I say from zero to hero. It's like, wait a minute, our average sales cycle time might be 4 to 5 months, but yet you just showed me a deal that went from start to close inside of 6 weeks, which tells me that's total bullshit. You've been working on that deal and you've been holding it back, and then you just put it in. And so when you see them skip stages, that starts to get me a little fired up. And it's not homework assignments. I try to always explain the why and why it matters to sellers when they think you're asking them for homework assignments. And I always try to think about, well, hey, that new SC that you just asked for, resources, you don't show me enough business to warrant that. What do you mean? I'm working on this, this, and this one. I don't see that. So how do I get what's in here into that so that I can plan for my business to better support you as my selling agents much better?
Yeah. How much do you see? I do this weekly post. I might be old school, but to me, it just seems like there's so many things, not to date myself, but that we would do, kind of 20 or 30 years ago in our sleep that I just would call, kind of sales 101, type things. And there's a whole kind of, laundry list, doing proper recap notes, doing executive relationships, making sure you keep the executive update, make sure that you're, end of any meeting, you got the next follow-up meeting booked, and there's 50 probably different things. How much of that do you see kind of missing generally, I'm talking about human, but, kind of generally just in the culture of sales and skill set of sales compared to what we grew up with?
I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if this is a generational thing or not. There is a void in that. And I also think that even some of the companies, the new startups, because I've been doing some advising work and consulting, there's this expectation that, okay, I hired a head of sales, therefore now that person is just going to make it rain. Or that my product is so amazing that if you as the consumer are too ignorant to know that you need it, you are now not worthy of even owning it.
Right. So
the hubris that comes from some of the startups and not really understanding that true go-to-market motion and function. And so when you think about the sellers, this is why I spend a lot of time on enablement. There's just this assumption that because you are in sales, you're just supposed to know. And I would always say, well, have we ever taught them how to sell this new product. What have we done to tell them about it and help them be successful? And I think that's why I spend a lot of time on that enablement process, and I'm a big fan of it. Where others might look at it as, like I mentioned earlier, rainbows and unicorns, and that it's just this pot of money that goes into, kind of this sunk cost that never really shows any return.
Right.
And rebuttal to always that always usually is because your turnover and your retention is horrible. So if you'd work more on a lot of the things we've talked earlier about in this podcast, is about the culture and the retention and hiring the right people, they stick around. So those training investments that you make in said people last longer. And then you see the productivity from that and the results from that. And so I think that's where folks are really short-sighted. So getting back to some of that that you asked, there is a gap. I think there's a generation that just thinks, I did a demo and we're done, right? Why don't you want to buy? and there's no follow-up. Or, just recently, I asked one of my salespeople on a large complex account with different lines of products. I said, "Where's your account plan?" "Well, I don't have one." "How do you keep it all straight?"
Yeah.
"Well, I do." I said, "Well, A, you don't. I guarantee you're missing something."
Right.
But how, not just to appease me as your manager and do the homework, but wouldn't you want this for yourself?
Yeah.
I would want to wake up and have some sort of playbook.
Yeah. Or even just have the org chart mapped out and do some coding based on what the feelings are. Have we gotten to them? What's the alignment? Right. As a basic piece of the account plan. Right.
An NFL head coach walks the sideline with a laminated piece of something that's probably 4 feet long, and they have signs on the sideline that in college football that people hold up with pictures that represent plays. They don't go into a game without a plan, right? Why would you approach a multi-billion-dollar account without one? It just blows my mind.
Yeah, crazy. All right, I get to time to wrap, and I'm going to hit up a couple of the comments here. So Ted, thank you. Talks about the ideal candidate profile that you mentioned. Love that for sure. It also says there are no shortcuts. And then from Neeraj, maybe you can give a short answer, because certainly could be very long, but thoughtful question here. Chris, appreciate your focus on enablement while equipping your sales with tools like Clary, 6sense, and Zoom Info addresses the question of who to reach out to. Are there specific focus areas to help them better understand buyers on the how part?
Yes, and that's not an easy thing. That's where you really need to partner with your marketing side. And this is exactly what May and I are in the process of doing now, because your ICP is different for the different lines of business that you have. And so you have to really define, who's the person that's interested in buying this stuff and is part of that decision-making process. Or are we just building products because we think we're building cool stuff and hopefully they come to it? And for us right now, our evolution, it being here 6 months, now and May being here about 5 months, we're tasked with trying to define, what does that ICP look like? Who is that person? Because there are no shortcuts. And then conveying that to our sellers and say, this is who your targeted buyer persona is for this product, because we have different personas based upon the 6 different products that we sell. And so our competition also varies by the different product lines that we sell, all servicing the same common data lake, but the products themselves for the output that they drive for our customer outcomes are very different. So it may not be the greatest answer, because Neeraj, there's no canned answer I can give you around how you necessarily do that. It's a collaboration with marketing, with product, with sales. That comes back to just that culture that you have with your executive staff, and figuring out jointly who are those buyers that you want to target specifically by product line. So for example, I have a product that right now is very keen to help solve a lot of PCI for challenges that customers might have. Very different than the product that I have for e-commerce people that care about blocking bots that are tying up all their traffic for their cloud service provider. It's a complicated answer, and it requires...
There you go.
That one requires workshopping.
There you go. Good job. Good question for sure. So you've been an awesome guest. Tucker, maybe throw up the sales community free link again. And I forgot to give a plug on my book. So did a book during COVID, had a bunch of friends contribute. Your go-to sales advisor. So Tucker can, it's a shameless plug. Tucker can put the link up there. Next week, I'm going to be on vacation with the kids down in Lake Norman outside of Charlotte. So we're going to have a replay for next week of somebody that Tucker will pick. And then the following week, July 25th, Dave Grant, who's president at New SUNY. Cool topic, transitioning from CMO to CRO to president. And they actually just did a round at $1.25 billion or something like that got announced yesterday. And then Dave Cronk, who's SVP of Tricentis, and another great kind of lineup from there for August. So, Chris, you've been awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. We could have gone all day or all week for sure.
No, Randy, this was wonderful. Thank you for having me on, and I look forward to participating more in the community. And let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to our sponsor, Alexander Group.